I have seen thousands of IEPs, and that ruling out piece is so important because, yeah, a diagnosis is a diagnosis, but then what do you do with the diagnosis? And how do you accommodate or how do you level the playing field at school with the right accommodations and services? Should this person get reading because they have a reading disability and they're below grade level in reading? Or should they get reading because they have a focusing issue or an attention issue, and they just need to fill in the gaps right now because they haven't been able to attend. And once they meet their goals, of course, then they're out of reading. So there's so many nuances. And I love the name of your company because legitimately that's what you guys do. You're diagnosticians. You're not just slapping an ADHD label on and saying, okay, you're good to go. You're spending 3 to 4 hours with people and thoroughly reviewing it and getting outside information from people who've known them their whole lives. Welcome to Successful with ADHD. I'm Brooke Schnittman. Let's get started. Hi, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Successful with ADHD. Today, I have Laurie Peterson and I have Abbey Weinstein, who are directors of Diagnostic Learning Services and eDiagnostic Learning. I'm going to introduce both of them separately, but I'm thrilled to have them here because they hosted me on their amazing podcast, Let's Talk Learning Disabilities. And since that, I think we've developed a really nice friendship and colleague relationship. And I've seen the work that these two amazing women have produced and the results of the evaluations that they review and go over with the clients that they serve. So real quickly, without further ado, Laurie Peterson is a Master's of Education. She also has an MA, an LPC, NCED, the list goes on, and is the founder and executive director of Diagnostic Learning Services and eDiagnostic Learning, as well as the host of SuccessFULL podcast, Let's Talk Learning Disabilities, and has a master's degree in special education, me too, and professional counseling. Laurie has dedicated herself to advocating for comprehensive assessments, which is so important, and that's what we're going to get into the nitty-gritty of today, that meet the diverse needs of students beyond school requirements. She's a respected voice in the field, actively educating groups and schools on understanding and supporting students with learning disabilities like dyslexia and ADHD. And in her spare time, Laurie serves on the executive board for the North Texas chapter of CHAD, Children and Adults with Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder. Thank you for doing that because that's a very robust job and it's not a paid job either. So thank you for dedicating your time to that.
Absolutely.
And then we have the wonderful Dr. Abbey Weinstein, who's the Director of Assessments for Diagnostic Learning Services and eDiagnostic Learning, as well as the co-host of Let's Talk Learning Disabilities as well, with over 22 years in education and has an extensive experience as an ABA home therapist, teacher, and educational diagnostician. Abbey holds a master's degree in special ed with educational diagnostician certification and a Ph.D. in special education with a minor in educational leadership from Texas Women's University. And Dr. Weinstein is actively involved in professional organizations, including the Council for Exceptional Children, Texas Educational Diagnostician Association, North Texas CHAD, and Council for Learning Disabilities. Okay. My mouth is dry now. Thank you, ladies, for coming on and for your grace. We have been wanting to do this for quite a while now, and we haven't because of my health issues with COVID, but thank you for being here. And I know that it's been a very busy summer for both of you with testing.
First of all, thank you for having us. We're always excited to be on other people's podcasts because we spend a lot of our time recording our own podcast with a lot of special guests. So it's fun to be on the other end and get to share what we do and what we're passionate about and what we do and why we do it and how thoroughly we do it. So thank you for having us.
Yes, thank you so much.
Absolutely. It's a pleasure. And it's nice to have the role reversal here. I get it. I like not having the pressure and just kind of answering the questions, but it's still pressurous.
Right.
So when I spoke to both of you, I had no idea that your company does online evaluations as well as in person. And of course, they're comprehensive and thorough, and there's a review of it, and it's more than 30 minutes. And because I've seen the results of the people you've tested, the impact they've had, and worked with them in coaching, and that awareness and the thoroughness of your evaluations has really transformed their process in coaching. So I commend both of you.
Thank you. I love that.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I was so excited to know that you do it virtually too, because we know that there is waiting lists in the UK, years of waiting lists and waiting lists all around. And that's what has made some of these online overnight ADHD evaluation companies popular unethically, right?
Yep.
Right.
So I know what you do is ethical. Can you explain how the testing goes? First of all, I know it's a lot, the length of time that the evaluation consists of, and how the review of it is done as well.
I think, what's interesting about what we do is that we want to meet the needs of the client. So it always starts with, what do they need to know this information for? Obviously, do they just want it for their own personal, like, do I have ADHD? I'd like to maybe get on medication, maybe get some accommodations at work. Or are they a student in college or high school where they're going to need some accommodations in place for standardized testing, things like ACT, SAT, GRE, GMAT, LSAT, those kinds of things. So first, we want to take that into consideration because we do offer two different types of evaluations for adults. For students that are needing any kind of accommodations, we want to make sure that we're giving them the right documentation. We'd hate for them to take their documentation back to their school or their, licensing agency and then say, oh, I'm sorry, we need a more thorough eval. So we include all the academic areas in addition to the ADHD so that we can show how the ADHD impacts them academically. That assessment's about 3.5 to 4 hours. And it's great information because not only can we diagnose the ADHD, but we can explain to them how it's impacting their academic abilities and why they're seeing some of the academic difficulties that they're seeing. Because that's typically the complaint they come to us with. I can't remember what I've read. I feel like I read things 100 times. I can't finish a test to save my life. And that's where their real struggles are. But for adults who aren't in school, they really just have more of those executive function struggles in the day-to-day life, procrastinating, time management, speaking from experience, forgetting to pick your kids up at school, things like that. They just want to know if they have it. So we have taken an approach where we feel like more information is better. And we want to rule out any other, issues that might be going on that could be causing some ADHD-like symptoms. So we do a full, standardized cognitive eval that looks at their processing skills. We do some executive functioning assessment. We do some questionnaires and surveys. And then we use an objective measure as well that they can take on the computer anywhere they live. And it's a 20-minute objective test. It's called the QB check. And it's a really, really, really boring test that helps us see what happens when they're bored. Because as you know, with ADHD, if it's something that's fun, we're going to kill it. But if it's boring, it's all you can do to stay focused. And so that gives us some amazing data. So we never rely on just one test. You should never, ever, ever make a diagnosis based off just one piece of data. Right. We want to look for a preponderance of evidence. So we take all of that information and then determine based on the diagnostic criteria if they need it. And if they do, what can they do about it? And Abbey and I are huge proponents of coaching. We feel like we both take medication for ADHD and it's a game changer.
Me too.
But it is not going to get me organized. It is not going to keep me from procrastinating. It doesn't affect my overwhelm. And that's where we feel like the coaching piece comes in. So we talk
my forgetfulness.
Exactly. So we talk ad nauseum about coaching and the importance of pairing those two things together. But our goal really is to be a resource for our clients that, we make this diagnosis, we go over all of the testing, and then a year later something happens. they've decided to change jobs, or they need, they just have questions. The medication maybe isn't working as much. We want to be a resource for them. So we're here for that as well. And I feel like it's really been a very rewarding process. And getting to not just address people here in our home state of Texas, but to help people across the country and across the globe has been awesome. It's been awesome.
That's incredible.
Yeah. I think to add to that, another really great aspect of doing a comprehensive evaluation is that we can rule out any type of learning disabilities that might be causing the inattention. Your child may be struggling in school and look very inattentive and hyperactive and whatnot, but it could be more, task avoidance because they're struggling in reading or writing or spelling or math. So that is another great aspect of our comprehensive assessment. We're testing all academic areas, and we're ruling out any type of learning differences or processing or disorders while we're looking at ADHD. And in addition, a lot of those online companies they just give the client a questionnaire to fill out online typically. And a lot of those questionnaires are more like screeners rather than diagnostic tools. But we're not only having, the client or the child's parents fill out an executive functioning skills survey based on their observations. We're working with the individual for 3.5 to 4 hours. So we have all that time to also observe them and how they do under pressure and under time constraints, and how well they can sustain their attention for 3.5 hours. And so, like Laurie said, we use a preponderance of evidence, and I think that is key. And it also, it helps us better explain to the client why they struggle with the things they struggle with. But also it helps with that plan for success moving forward. It helps give them hope and, understanding and knowledge. But it also allows them to receive those accommodations if need be. And there's also, it's very, very common for individuals with ADHD to have other comorbid conditions or coexisting conditions. Sure. So, a lot of times we will find there's an anxiety disorder, or there's a reading comprehension disability, or there's dyslexia.
Yes. Yes. I mean, all of us have been in the school system at some point. And I have seen thousands of IEPs, and that ruling out piece is so important because, a diagnosis is a diagnosis, but then what do you do with the diagnosis? Mm-hmm. And how do you accommodate, or how do you level the playing field at school with the right accommodations and services? Mm-hmm. Should this person get reading because they have a reading disability and they're below grade level in reading? Or should they get reading because they have a focusing issue or an attention issue, and they just need to fill in the gaps right now because they haven't been able to attend before? And, once they meet their goals, of course, then they're out of reading. So there's so many nuances. And I love the name of your company because, legitimately, that's what you guys do. You're diagnosticians. You're not just slapping an ADHD label on and saying, okay, you're good to go. You're spending 3 to 4 hours with people and thoroughly reviewing it and getting outside information from people who've known them their whole lives.
Mm-hmm. I think, and to touch on, Abby was talking about the screeners that some of these other companies are using that can be valuable information as part of a comprehensive, assessment. But, my fear with those is always, I can go through and basically what those are just the diagnostic criteria. Do you do these things? And if you check enough boxes, 5 or 6 out of 9, boom, you're in. But why? Why do you do these things? Why do you have trouble paying attention? Is it because you have another learning disability? Is it because you have an auditory processing issue? There are so many reasons why you might check that box. It may not be ADHD, and you may be headed down a road that's not going to be where your health really comes from. And so to me, that is careless.
Yeah. And think about how much time and energy and money is spent on medication and the wrong type of support. And then you come to find out years later that it wasn't ADHD, or it is ADHD, but it's also these other coexistent conditions that are the source of your anxiety, or the source of your grogginess, or the source of your working memory issues. So
absolutely,
it's really like you would never go to a doctor and just, say, hey, my knee hurts. And then you take a questionnaire and then he does surgery, right?
Right.
I think that's like,
It'd be scary.
It's very scary. And now I want to also talk about the flip side in all of this. Like, so you guys are very ethical in what you do. I've learned a lot about both of you and your company. And I know that there's people out there that cannot afford to do a comprehensive evaluation. So what do you recommend for those people who just don't have the funds and the resources to pay for a private evaluation?
And this is what's so frustrating too. And honestly, and I wish that this wasn't we don't come across the same thing. Insurance just doesn't want to cover a lot of this stuff. And even when they do cover it, what they reimburse the practitioner for is embarrassing. And it's unfortunate because it's caused a lot of professionals to move away from taking insurance. However, there are still some out there that do, some psychologists or psychiatrists that may still be in network. Now, they're probably going to have a wait list. But at the end of the day, if that is the way that you can get your diagnosis and you have to wait 6 months, but you only have to pay your copay, it might be worth it, right? Oftentimes, those professionals may or may not do a full comprehensive battery. They may focus more on just the ADHD, which is okay. They'll still do a good eval. They may or may not include the learning disability stuff. But that is always my first recommendation if it's not a school-aged child. If it's a school-aged child, obviously going back through the school, again, it can be a little bit of a headache, but you pay for it with your taxes.
Yes.
Go take advantage of that.
Many school districts do not diagnose ADHD.
No, they don't.
Oh my gosh, yes.
That was a great recommendation that Laurie said by, going through a psychologist that may be in your insurance network. I also have recommended to clients before that can't afford, our evaluation to call some, a lot of big 4-year universities, their psychology departments have, graduate students that have to get so many hours in administering different types of tests that they'll take outside clients and they'll do comprehensive assessments or psychoeducational.
They have a clinic
or psychological evaluations. So it's also a good idea to call your nearest 4-year, university, ask to be connected to the psychology department. That's usually where they have those people, those graduate students that will do testing. Absolutely.
I've never heard of that. And I appreciate you sharing that with the audience because that is huge. So go, if you don't have the funds, there's too long of a wait list for people in network, go to your local university, see if there's a grad student who needs the hours. That's wonderful. What I also know as a workaround, obviously it's not my first recommendation, but you said for schools that not all schools can test ADHD. And I've seen it because I've been in several schools, several amazing schools in New York. And then I came to Florida and the education system is slightly different. In New York, you have to have someone who knows how to test for ADHD, right? Who's licensed.
Wow.
So we had someone in our school district to do it, but in Florida, they don't. Well, at least I don't want to say for all districts in Florida, but for the district I'm in, they don't test for ADHD. So what the workaround that I've seen in some of my clients is writing the letter to the school district to get the full battery of evaluations. I don't know how long it's going to take, but you do that. And then you go to the pediatrician if you can't afford the full comprehensive, right? And get the ADHD diagnosis if they believe that there's ADHD as well.
Well, and a lot of times in that school evaluation, that was going to be another recommendation, because oftentimes if you have a good pediatrician that will really read that report and see all the times where the clinician mentions difficulty paying attention, had to get refocused, very fidgety. I mean, you could probably just read through that report based on, if you know how to interpret the scores and read the observations. It's kind of a slam dunk. All the data is there. They just need someone to, make the diagnosis. Right. So that is a really great idea.
Yes.
And in Texas, we have a lot of districts, actually majority of districts, we have school psychologists that work for the school districts, and they will do some observations and some testing and some surveys. And they'll say that the student demonstrates some characteristics of ADHD, but they still can't diagnose it. They want it to be a medical diagnosis and this form that has to be filled out by an MD, which is a little frustrating at times, but
it's extremely frustrating.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Seeing it from a parent end, like myself, I have 2 stepsons with ADHD. One of them is so severely hyperactive, off the charts ADHD. And the district we were working with, even with my credentials, we had to fight tooth and nail for over 2 years for them to test him and give him a thorough, even though he was already a classified IEP student. He had an but he wasn't classified under other health impaired. He was classified under speech and language. He had the ADHD diagnosis, but they wouldn't make it other health impaired. Don't get me started.
Terrible.
So they started telling me things that had nothing to do with ADHD. Like, I didn't know what I was talking about and I felt crazy. And to your point about money and time, I ended up having to hire an advocate just because she had advocate next to her name.
Mm-hmm.
And luckily she got the testing for him inside the school district. But when you're thinking about which route you should go, right? Just consider all of these things. If you're a parent listening to it, it might not be as easy as you think to get the school to test, depending on where you are, but hopefully you can faster.
Exactly. Another thing, the schools, oftentimes they're looking for quote unquote educational need. And if the student's making decent grades, they won't.
What's decent?
Well, if they're passing. If they're passing.
And what's passing, right?
70 here in Texas. If they're passing, then a lot of schools don't see a need to spend the time and money and clientele or personnel on an evaluation. And they'll say, yeah, they don't even need any accommodations because they're doing just fine. But they don't have any idea the amount of hours and time and effort that is spent behind the scenes at home in order to get those passing grades.
Absolutely. You almost want to recommend the parent to just let the kid fail so the school district can see that, no, they don't have the natural ability and at the same level as the other neurotypical quote unquote students do.
Sure. Right. Or the student did their homework, but they're so disorganized they can't find it in their backpack, or they forget it at home and it doesn't get turned in. That should be a red flag to the school staff. Instead of letting mom drive up to the school and drop off the homework, that should be part of that data they're collecting to determine, does the student have a need for some supports?
So get this. So in the school that my stepson was in, he was getting 30s and 40s on classwork. But then, of course, when he would go to school with homework, because I forced him to do his homework, he was getting 90s and 100s. So they're like, yeah, the average is 70. So he's not failing. Right.
Right.
So it could be very frustrating as a parent, to your point.
It is very frustrating. And then if you have an evaluation that shows, for instance, his basic reading skills are well above average, then we need to figure out how to get him to work up to his true potential in the classroom setting, in the educational environment, because a 70 is not his true potential.
But they don't care about the potential. They care about passing.
Passing. Yeah. Oh yeah. It's so any parents listening, we hear your frustrations for sure. Have you seen an uptick over the past few years in evaluations?
Definitely.
I feel like we've seen an uptick in school-aged evaluations since kids were home with COVID, and parents got to actually see what the kids were doing or could and couldn't do. And I think that blew up. But I feel like our adult ADHD evaluations have really blown up. And I think that's been because of social media and the awareness and those companies that are popping up to offer these evaluations. It's just brought more awareness to the whole space. And now everyone is like, wow, maybe I do have it. But I do feel like we've seen an increase both from COVID, and ever since then it's just sort of snowballed. Because even kids today will have parents that said, look, my kids were home for 2 years during the most pivotal years in their education. I don't know if it's just when we've got gaps, we can't pay attention, or there's really, what is it? And they're just frustrated.
Have you noticed that the people, because a lot of people are self-diagnosing, which, good for them if they can't get the evaluation right away, right, in the meantime. But have you noticed the people who have self-diagnosed or had the inclination that it was ADHD, I'm more specifically talking about adults here, that they've been right with their diagnosis?
I would say the majority, yes. If they suspected it, whether they read about symptoms on the internet or whatever, if they suspect it and they have taken the step to request an evaluation and pay for it, the majority of the times their gut feeling is correct and they do end up having ADHD. However, there are a lot of adults that feel like they're struggling with all of these executive functioning skills or their working memory or symptoms of ADHD. But when we dig deep and have them fill out a history of symptoms form, they didn't have any struggles during childhood. And, part of the diagnostic criteria says that symptoms must have been present prior to age 12. So a lot of adults, I think, due to age and
hormones,
the demands of their job and not learning coping and compensatory skills on their own, they start struggling. COVID, yep. But, so it's not often, but there have definitely been, a handful or more of adult clients that think they have ADHD, but we can't really diagnose it because they didn't indicate any symptoms during childhood.
Yeah. So it's more of just your executive functions have deteriorated over time, as they should, throughout age, or hormones, like you said, or COVID, or traumatic brain injury, or dementia, or Alzheimer's, or diabetes, like so many things, right?
Right.
And just because they don't have an ADHD diagnosis doesn't mean that they can't do anything about it, right? Like,
we still recommend coaching.
Yeah, exactly.
Yep.
Exactly.
What's interesting though, Brooke, is that we do have a lot of adults that come to us not even talking about ADHD. I've literally had, they all think they have dyslexia, and they think they have dyslexia because they have to read and read and reread and reread, and they can't comprehend. Yep. And we do the test, and it's like, it's not dyslexia, you have ADHD. Yes. And they're like, no, I don't. No. And we've got all the data, right? And we're like, but look at all of this. Look at the patterns. Look at your QB test. Like, look at all of this. And they're like, no, it's dyslexia. And we're like, it's hard because they've decided what it is via Google.
It's so interesting. I read something via Google. I read something that 45% of people with ADHD also have a coexisting learning disability. The top one being dyslexia. But the thing that is so fascinating, right, that I don't think the layperson knows because they're not a specialist, right? And there is all this misinformation out there, is that it's usually not dyslexia, even though you think it's dyslexia. I'm not gaslighting you and saying you don't have dyslexia, but it's less common to the person who thinks they have dyslexia.
Yes.
Well, and it's because we don't understand what dyslexia is. right? And that's where the issue comes from. People think it's letter reversals. People think it's difficulty comprehending what they read. And while comprehension can be impacted by dyslexia, that is not the only, the only characteristic. So we really have to inform them. And I would say 99% of the time, once we really explain to them what dyslexia is, what it looks like, and show them how their performance in those areas was average to above average, it does. And sometimes they need to marinate in a little bit. But by the time we're done talking to them and going over everything, they're like, you know what, that actually makes more sense. Like but they are, they come to us 100% sure they have dyslexia. And it's really interesting. And you're right, it does coexist. But I do think in adults, it's less common if you haven't already been diagnosed with dyslexia, to all of a sudden wake up with it one day or have it get so bad as an adult that you get diagnosed. We've had older students get diagnosed, college kids, that are super bright and have learned how to compensate. But the majority of those people are going to get caught during their school aged years. I wanted to just throw out too, we've had a couple college kids come through, and I do feel like this is more common than what we've even seen, who have been incredibly bright. And they've actually been tested for ADHD in the past. And a psychologist or a psychiatrist or a doctor has said, no, you don't have it, because they scored so well on their standardized testing, right? Even their working memory was off the charts. And that's just because they're crazy smart and they've got great compensatory strategies. But that doesn't mean just because you're super smart that you can't have ADHD.
Right.
And so a lot of people come in, we've had people come in that have scored off the charts on all the standardized stuff, but the QB and their symptoms and their history scream ADHD. So again, it's not about intelligence. It's not about school performance, because a lot of people have coping strategies and have developed those out of necessity. So there's so much more that goes into it than just one test or one score.
Yes. And real quick, I know we don't have too much time, but I recently learned more about POTS and the correlation of that with women with ADHD. And now, of course, I'm hyper focusing on it. I'm like, do I have POTS? Do I have POTS? So anyway, so there's just all these other things, right? That we can discover. So to wrap up here, what would be the first step if someone is either struggling in school? Let's start there. And then for an adult who thinks that they need more information about how their brain operates.
For personally speaking, call us. We're happy to talk to you. Abby, that's what we do. If you call, you're not committing to being tested. If you just have questions or want to pick our brain, like that's what we do. But I would say, check out, we have some podcasts about the different learning disabilities, your podcast, do a little bit of research, but really if you just want to talk to somebody and just say, here's where I'm at, what do you think? And we're not going to try to rope you into testing. There are a lot of times where we'll say, I don't know that that's the right thing for you to do right now. But we're happy to answer any questions that they have.
That's so nice that you do that. That's really, not many people do that.
People get the right information,
Yeah, there are a lot of times that we recommend a parent, go to their pediatrician first, or that someone, talk to a counselor or go
psychiatrist,
or go rule out, some visual processing issues or auditory process, hormone imbalance. Yeah, maybe you just entered menopause or
perimenopause for that.
Yeah, exactly. And also, the fact that we do, in addition to all the processing testing and the academic testing and some executive functioning skills surveys, that objective test that we have that is an objective measure of regulating attention, activity, and impulsivity, it has been such a valuable piece of data because it graphs their performance and it actually compares them to a sample of someone their age without ADHD in the control group. So it's been very helpful for the people that are like, nah, I don't have ADHD. I don't think so. And it's really convincing data. also for those parents that maybe they only have one child, or the child they're getting tested is the oldest child and they don't really have, a frame of reference for comparison, and they don't think their child has ADHD. And we show them the results of, look, can they sustain and regulate their attention during a 20-minute test? And then we can make it, like in the classroom during direct instruction, especially if it's a subject that's not as interesting or meaningful to them. During 20 minutes of instruction, they are missing lots of pieces. So if we don't get the ADHD symptoms well managed and under control right now, then eventually your student may have gaps and fall farther behind. So I love that we have that objective data, and it's worked in our favor in many different instances. And even we've had, parents call to schedule on a lot of adolescents, especially girls, but boys and girls have said to their parents, I think I have ADHD and I want to be tested for ADHD. So they can fill out their survey and they can mark every single thing as a definite concern. And, the parent is like, really, you're basing this on her input? But then when we show
Yes.
the data, right? The data.
Yes, I am actually.
Right. But, their input is super important and valuable.
Of course.
However, if they're determined to have ADHD so they can get accommodations or they can be like their friends or whatever, they can kind of, overly report high symptoms, but you can't trick that QB test, that objective measure. There's no way of tricking that test or, causing it you score higher.
And that's why it's so important to get a thorough evaluation. And just to that point, because you brought it up here, I had several people come to me on my Instagram and say, I'm so upset I wasn't diagnosed with ADHD, because they thought, right, that they finally understood their brain. Mm-hmm. But that's why we need to understand our brain, right? If it's not ADHD, it could be something else, and maybe you can get that help for that, right? Or if you don't know what your diagnosis is yet, you could still engage in coaching or other behavioral supports that could help your symptoms at least.
Mm-hmm. Brooke, one quick thing I wanted to share too that Abbey and I kind of enjoy doing is if someone has been tested and they don't understand the results or they don't understand why they don't have it, we're happy to look it over and explain and help them understand it, because I do feel like you get that information and there are some people out there that do an amazing job of explaining it and helping people understand, but oftentimes people leave an office and think, why don't I have it? I don't understand, even though they're holding a report in their hand. So if someone just needs an explanation, and we'll help them, figure out, was this a good, thorough evaluation? Did it cover everything? Is there something else you need to know, whether that's from us or from somebody else? Doesn't matter. Is there more data gathering that needs to happen? So we're happy to look over and help people sort of interpret those results if they need it.
True moral diagnosticians here who just are looking to help the neurodivergent community, all ages. So Abbey and Laurie, where can people find you if they are looking for information, if they think they need an evaluation, or if they want to review their evaluation that they already had?
So our website is eDiagnosticLearning.com. Best place to find us. You can read about all the different things we test for, how we do it. And then there's a way you can contact us through the website. Just put a note in there that you'd like to talk to Laurie or Abbey, and we'll make sure we get right back to you.
Definitely.
Wonderful.
And one more great resource, in my opinion, that we have is our podcast called Let's Talk Learning Disabilities. Yes. And if you go to www.ltldpodcast.com, that is the actual website for our podcast. You can see every episode that we've recorded in chronological order, talking about various disabilities, but you can also choose by category. So you can click on the box that says ADHD, and it will bring up every episode that we've recorded where we've talked about ADHD or we've interviewed an ADHD coach, and listen to those, because that's a great resource and it may help you decide, yes, I want to call them to schedule an evaluation, or maybe I don't need to, or I need to work on these skills first or find a coach first. So I just want to throw that out there as a great resource.
Thank you so much. And I'll put this all in the show notes too. So for those visual learners, you'll get the visual as well. And you could just click directly on the link. Abbey, Laurie, thank you so much for being on here. I know I learned a lot, and I'm sure our listeners will too. And please try to take a break. I know that you are swamped right now with evaluations.
We are, but we're making it.
We will. Thank you so much for having us. We really appreciate it. And thank you for having us, Brooke.
Thanks, Brooke. We appreciate it. And thank you for what you do. We are so grateful to have you as a resource for our clients.
Absolutely.
Oh, thank you. And right back at you. Thanks for listening to this episode of Successful with ADHD. I hope it helped you on your journey. And if you need any additional support for you or a loved one with ADHD, feel free to reach out to us at coachingwithbrooke.com and all social media platforms at Coaching with Brooke. And remember, it's Brooke with an E. Thanks again for listening. See you next time.